Well, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're super excited to get into some really interesting topics. I'll run through some quick introductions here. So my name is Rhett. I'm a sales director here at Closed. Just so you have some context, Closed is an innovative software and service for win-loss analysis. Essentially, we help companies uncover why they win and lose deals. And that's actually going to be a pretty prominent theme in the conversation today. So definitely want to get to our distinguished guests here first. I'm going to start with Katie Harkins. Katie has been in various sales roles over 15 years and is currently the VP of Sales at User Testing. She brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to us today, and we're excited to have her. Welcome, Katie.
Nice to meet everybody.
Awesome. Next, we have Michael Tuso. Michael is the co-founder of a new startup, Calypso, and has served in every sales role from the SDR to the CEO. So he knows a thing or two about this. He's been named a top sales leader to follow by various accomplished organizations and brings unique perspective on all things. Michael, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Okay, well, let's go ahead and dig in, everybody. We have some, like I said, some really interesting stuff to get into. And I think just to set the stage here, when we look at the sales landscape right now, things are changing, especially in the tech space. And what you've probably noticed is win rates are declining, sales life cycles are getting longer, pipelines are shrinking, things are becoming more and more complicated. It's a tough environment out there. So what we find is that a lot of leaders and a lot of reps are taking a close look at their CRM data in an effort to understand why they're winning and losing deals, right? Because that's oftentimes the only data that they have at their disposal. Now, what we have done here at Close is what we do. Again, we provide qualitative win-loss interviews. We engage buyers directly to uncover the reasons why companies win and lose. And it's interesting that as we've kind of contrasted the information from interviews and then also comparing the information pulled from our customer CRM data, we've actually been able to uncover some really interesting insights here. And so I'm going to set the table a little bit by referring to a couple of data points that we're going to get into here. That producer, there we go. Okay, so the first one I'm going to reference here is the competitor field being wrong. So you all know how this works. When a sales rep loses a deal, they have some type of CRM dropdown maybe that they're going to enter, why they lost the deal. One of those fields tends to be the competitor field, right? Now, what's interesting is that when we contrasted our buyer feedback with what information was actually in the CRM, that data was actually wrong 65% of the time, meaning that sales reps more than likely don't really know who they're losing the deal to, which is a massive issue. If we don't know who we're losing to, who our main competitors are, that can be very, very problematic when it comes to gaining a competitive advantage in the market. Now, with this next one here, close loss data being wrong, right? This is another one that is very, very common, right? Now, the interesting thing is that, again, when we compared the CRM data with the buyer feedback, what we found is that that information only matched about 15% of the time. So what that means is that 85% of the time when sales reps are implementing those reasons why we lost the deal, it's wrong the vast majority of the time. So it's really hard to make data-driven decisions off of CRM data, especially when we know that, again, it has an 85% chance of being wildly inaccurate. So that's actually a staggering data point that our team uncovered here. This last one, this one's actually a little bit of an interesting one, a little bit nuanced, but so essentially shows that 44% of the time, the data in your CRM is just telling you the outcome of the deal without any insight into why the deal was actually lost. So if you're kind of using an analogy here, think about if you end up getting, if your marriage ends, why did your marriage end? Because we got divorced, right? That's an outcome. It's not necessarily an actual reason, an informed reason as to why it actually occurred. This is actually something that we found prominently featured in a lot of the CRM data that our clients have as well. So again, when you take a big picture, step back at this information, it's really hard to be able to navigate strategic decisions if we don't have qualitative data to back those decisions. And again, that's where we really come in and say, hey, we really ought to be leveraging buyer feedback as much as we can to influence those decisions. So setting the table with that information, we're going to be talking about three main pillars today. The first pillar, how do we generate higher quality pipeline of buyers with folks that actually have a high likelihood of actually buying, right? The next, how do we prove value during the sales process? Something that is absolutely paramount to any sales team. And then lastly, how do we give sales reps and sales leaders confidence that they're making the right decision in an effort to win more deals? Those are things that I know that me personally, I guess myself all the time as a sales leader. How do I know that I have confidence when it comes to, making those strategic decisions? What information do I have at my disposal? Okay. So that's more or less what we're going to be covering here today, in addition to some really, really great insights from our awesome guests here. So let's dive into this first pillar here, generating higher quality leads. Okay, so it's interesting. Like I mentioned, at Close, we run a very rigorous, win-loss analysis program. And from that program, we're actually able to determine who our buyers are oftentimes, but then just as important, who they're not. It's interesting. I'll use a little anecdote here. I was actually in a meeting with one of our co-founders, Spencer Dent, just on a client call. And what they found is that they had a number of opportunities that were actually exiting their conversion funnel early in the process. And Spencer made the observation that if that tends to be the case, that could potentially be indicative of poor product market fit. Maybe they're getting in front of your sellers, they have that initial conversation, they realize that it's not necessarily a fit. And, to kind of, support that assertion, in a recent interview with Andy Paul and Howard Brown of Revenue.io, they talked about how sales reps often waste upwards of 50% of their time trying to qualify unqualified buyers, right? So we let poor leads into the conversion funnel. Reps are spending a lot of time with those leads. It's a lot of wasted time. It can be a big, big problem if we're not using buyer feedback to actually understand, what types of leads we're trying to fill our funnel with. So to get things kicked off, Katie, I'm going to pass this first question over to you. Is there a time you've used feedback from your buyers to improve pipeline quality or sales efficiency? And if so, I'd love to hear of some examples.
Yeah, for sure. So absolutely, and all the time. So I work at user testing, so we kind of practice what we preach. So eat your own dog food, drink your own champagne type of thing. So we're listening to our buyers, our customers, our prospects all the time. And it's all about synthesizing that feedback and making it actionable quickly in a new sales cycle. So that whether that be for the AEs or the managers or their higher ups, like you can do it all the time to generate new pipeline, but more importantly, like what you're saying, improve it so you speed up your sales cycles. I guess if I have like a specific example, you can take buyer feedback or prospect feedback if they don't convert and give it to your demand gen team as content. So blog posts, webinars, case studies, so they can actually take the potential objection and turn it into collateral for your sales team to use.
I love the concept of just repurposing that information and just like recycling it through the org for a constructive purpose. I love that. Michael, I'd love to pass it over to you and get your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So early on in building the sales team at Chili Pepper, this dynamic happened in helping us actually like focus on the right persona and the right product. And we got that through talking to customers and getting that feedback really early on. It actually ended up, because we did this, it actually helped us triple the business in quite a short amount of time and became one of the fastest growing startups of that year. They continue to do really well, but a big part of that was a switch in that early strategy based on customer feedback. The other thing is early on at that same time, it really helped us zone in on our ICP. And so if you're prospecting and spending the wrong time with the wrong types of buyers who you intellectually believe are the right people, but in reality aren't the types of people that you should be paying attention to, you create a gap. And so that gap needs to be filled by almost like objective, empirical type of data collection that can't just be intellectual. It needs to be something that you kind of prove to yourself empirically that this is my buyer, this is my right person. And I'm sort of going through this all over again now at Calypso and learning those same hard lessons starting from the ground up. So I just can't emphasize this type of feedback for founders, for sales teams, all the way down to the individual sales rep themselves.
Wonderful. That's amazing feedback, Michael. I love, in terms of just the qualitative feedback, the application. Again, like you mentioned, it's so interesting because you've kind of been on both sides of this, where you've already been able to grow teams significantly, but now kind of being at the forefront of it again, going through a lot of those growing pains and kind of having a reckoning with a lot of these fundamental things is really interesting as well. Wonderful. Well, listen, if there are any other comments, would love to hear from either of you. If not, we can go ahead and move on to pillar 2 because we have a lot of other good stuff to get into here. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into the second pillar here. So this one is absolutely paramount, proving the value during the sales process. I think that I speak for all of us here as a sales leader. If we can't demonstrate the value, we really just aren't going to be very successful throughout the sales process, right? So every single rep has had the experience of losing a deal. And I think I speak on behalf of most sellers that when we lose deals, when we go and we enter that reason in the CRM, it's a product issue, or it's always pricing, or it's timing. It's never my fault. It's always something else going on outside of my control. And in reality, when you look at the reasons why deals are actually lost, they're so much more complex than that. In fact, studies have shown that sales reps are actually wrong upwards of about 60% of the time when they lose a deal. So that means that sellers actually have a very poor understanding of why they are winning and losing deals. The majority of the time, they actually don't understand. Another kind of interesting piece of this is that when you look at the number of factors that actually impact whether a deal is won or lost, it's very rarely just one thing, right? It's rarely not just pricing or not just timing. It's usually a variety of different things. So a simple CRM dropdown is actually a very poor, method to gather that information. When in reality, a more qualitative feedback avenue is actually going to yield much better results there. I actually want to reference a quick example of one of our clients. We actually sat down with her recently, and she actually shared this example with us, which is extremely powerful. A very powerful example of how, when that value is communicated effectively, what a difference it can make during the sales process. So in this case, what they found, they took a look at some of their win-loss data, and they found that they were losing a large number of deals to carrier integrations. This is actually a common thing, right? If we don't have the carrier integrations, this can negatively impact deals. But the issue, or the interesting thing about this scenario is that they actually had these integrations, right? These were not integrations that they did not possess, which was, that's kind of an interesting point of feedback to receive. So what they did was they took that win-loss feedback, knowing that they were losing deals because of this, and they deployed resources specifically to help sellers understand how to convey this value in demos, in discovery calls. They deployed their marketing efforts to make sure that these integrations were first and foremost in a lot of their, the ways that they put it in front of customers, or from a pricing and packaging standpoint, they made sure that these integrations were very clearly communicated. What ended up happening was this carrier integration piece, which was a central reason to why they were losing deals, actually became one of the most prominent reasons why they were winning deals after they made some of these changes. I love this example for a few reasons, but one of the big ones is that it's not like they needed to deploy significant financial resources to the complete rebuild of all these integrations, right? They had already done that. The big thing that needed to change was simple training, right? And making sure that sellers were equipped with the ability to actually convey this value. And lo and behold, a complete 180 change. Now, one of the biggest reasons why they're losing is one of the biggest reasons why they're actually winning deals, which is pretty incredible. So, Michael, I want to pass this over to you now. Do you have any experiences where you changed an aspect of your sales process based on customer feedback? And then how did that impact things positively? And I'd love to hear about an example that you might have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you brought up a good point in that as well, where it's not just about where you're losing, but like, what should you keep doing? And sometimes like we can lose sight of those things. Some of the things that I've seen to be successful here, there's one company that I was working with that adding a trial, like if they could get them into a trial, the conversion rate was like 80% or something. So again, it's like being really empirical about the feedback that you're getting, and then figuring out how to deploy it in a way that makes sense for your company. At another company, the feedback was like maybe the sales reps were like hard closing a bit too much, which was like a bit of a revelation. So then if you have tight feedback loops, then that's to Katie's point earlier, like you should be able to have actionable pieces of information that you are then incorporating into your one-on-one sales coaching. There was other examples where the reps needed to do more discovery. And another example there needed to be more segmentation based on outbound and inbound, we discovered. So like the sales rep skills were best suited for a certain segment. Like we were usually pretty good at that. But then also like close rates and win rates were different by rep, by also inbound and outbound. So we tailored our coaching in accordance to that. And I remember one rep I was working with had a close rate of like 10% on outbound. And we ended up like through coaching, through this feedback, we're able to raise his close rate to 20%. And then the CEO was all happy. So yeah, there's a lot of different examples where you can take feedback and really help you here. But those are just a couple we did to change our sales process.
I love that. If you have presided over organizations where you've seen that type of increase on an individual rep level, let's you and I definitely connect after, because I'd like to pick your brain on a few things, if that's all right.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Katie, would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah. So I just recommend taking the last customer that you closed and just pick their brain. Even in the remote world of like post-COVID, sharing how they sold up in an organization is really interesting. And how did that go? Was it Slack? Was it a one-on-one? Did they take their boss out to lunch? Like what resonated with the higher ups? Because then you can use that later on in different sales cycles. And so we started hearing that they were selling their bosses over Slack when COVID first hit. And so what we did is actually started creating Slack channels for our prospects to communicate on. So we were communicating on a level that they were, or a tech stack that they were living in. And that helped with our close ratios. And it was easy for the AEs and the buyers to collaborate together. And then this was kind of user testing specific, but we bring an example of what to test. So on someone's like prototype or website, or even if it's a hardware prospect, we bring that example to our initial calls. So it opens up their eyes to the capabilities of the platform. And that piece really shortens our sales cycles so they buy quicker.
Interesting. Katie, it's interesting you mentioned that, because we actually do something relatively similar here at Closed, where a big part of our process, and this is actually something that we're going to discuss here at the end of the conversation with everybody, is that, again, we really provide that feedback in the form of qualitative interviews. So actually sitting down with buyers, engaging them, having an in-depth interview with them to really understand what motivated their decisions one way or the other. And so as a part of that, there's obviously going to be a level of skepticism coming in. How effective are the interviews? Are you going to be able to reach my buyers? So a big part of our proof of concept, or a way that we are able to show value in our process, is that we actually put it to the test. We actually offer a free interview where we say, hey, if there's a particular opportunity where you're a little bit confused as to why you may have lost that opportunity, let us know. We're happy to reach out to them, conduct a qualitative interview, show you the feedback, aggregate the information in our platform, and actually provide that proof of concept. And what we have actually found is that that's actually one of the most prominent, what we refer to as decision drivers, the things that actually influence the deal. On the deals where we actually have this value-based proof of concept, our win rates skyrocket. So naturally, we really try and lean into those things. And it sounds like you've done something very similar there as well.
Yeah, we always talk about like the bar stool. So you've got 3 legs on a bar stool. You've got like big data, you've got your qualitative, and you've got your quant. If you don't have all 3, then it doesn't stand up, right? So organizations need all 3 to make better decisions.
I love that. I love positioning it in the form of that bar stool as well. That's a really interesting way of positioning it. Michael, before we move on, I think that bar stool concept is actually really fascinating. Any other comments on value-based selling, especially when it comes to, really putting your sellers in a position to be success, where, showing that value is absolutely paramount, especially in an economic environment where things continue to grow more and more competitive?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts off of that. I think the experiential selling piece that you all are highlighting is critical. I think a lot of times, as a buyer, I get lots of claims all day long. Oh, we can raise your ROI by X. Oh, we can do this. So anytime you can make it experiential, it makes them feel it, and that's really great. Also, if you can get them to show what they're currently doing as a status quo, that's actually takes it a little bit further as well. And just to double click on something mentioned as well, If you can take customer words like through this sort of like investigative effort you're doing with the analysis, and then you use that as a part of your sales cycle, that has like really significantly helped me go to market with Calypso like much faster. For example, if you just literally take those words and bring them to someone else, and you kind of see their eyes light up when you're on like a call, which is always fun to kind of get to that point, but it's like a process to get there. So those are two concepts. The third thing I would add, I'm a huge fan of the jobs to be done framework. I don't think we talk about it enough, but like, what are they hiring you to do? They're hiring your product to do something, and it's helping them achieve some goal. I think sometimes we talk about it a bit like aspirationally, but I think like especially in like days like today, I think we need to be like really clear, like no fluff. This is like directly how it's going to help you achieve your objectives, get better, faster, smarter, all these different things. So I think like I really recommend like everybody, check out that concept of jobs to be done in addition to some of these other things as well. And then what it does is it enables us to get very specific about what we mean by adding value. And I think that's a really critical bar to pass.
Love that. Jobs to be done. Good reference point for all of us. So thank you for sharing that, Michael. I think that's fantastic. And I also love what you mentioned about, being able to utilize the actual, terminology or terms or things that your buyers are actually leveraging. And again, kind of repurposing those things for, future conversations. I think that just adds additional layers of confidence that they're speaking our language. They understand the environment in which we operate. They understand what we're doing here. So I think that's great feedback. Love that. Okay, well, let's go ahead and dive into our third pillar here. Also very, very important. Again, as we navigate a complicated economic situation, how can we ensure that we as leaders have the confidence in the data-driven decisions that we make? And then how do we empower our reps with that confidence as well, right? This is, again, very tricky. And I'm probably speaking on behalf of, I don't want to speak for everybody here. This is probably more on my end. I am somebody, I second guess myself a lot, right? I'll make a change, what I believe to be a strategic change to help benefit my team. And then I find myself wondering, what data points are actually motivating these decisions or these training topics or the resources that I want to provide for my team so that they can be successful. It can be a tough thing to manage, right? So I think that this is a really interesting example of how utilizing buyer feedback can help instill confidence. Not only, everything starts, from the top and trickles down. But so for us as leaders to make sure that we have the confidence in the decisions that we make, the strategic decisions, and how that will inevitably trickle down to the success of individual contributors and sellers. So one example I'd like to use here is that we actually have a CRO, a client of ours that has worked with us very closely for a number of years now. And one of the ways that, he had been utilizing his buyer feedback, and again, he had been running his own win-loss analysis programs independently for a long time, to very mixed reviews. When he started using Close, one thing that really stood out to him was the independent third-party nature of the feedback that he received, where it was very much unbiased. In his words, not sure how many Seinfeld fans we have out there, but nobody wants to tell you your baby's ugly, right? This was something that he kind of learned the hard way. So the independent third-party reviews, and it was interesting that as we conducted some of these interviews, one of the things that he uncovered was that the buyers on a consistent basis were saying, hey, not only do we see the value, we would actually even pay more for this solution, right? Which, hey, that's a great problem to have. Maybe not everybody has that problem, but this was legitimately what he had found in his win-loss data. So what he did was they were actually able to increase the prices by 30% without seeing a dip in win rates, right? Now, that is a bold strategic decision to make if you don't have the buyer feedback to really corroborate or support such a strategic decision. But it gave him the confidence of knowing that we have built so much value and credibility with our clients. We feel comfortable making this change, which ultimately is going to have a massive impact on revenue, right? So a really interesting example of how that win-loss data can influence decisions at the top, which then allows us to instill confidence all the way down the org. So Katie, I'm going to pass this question over to you to start. What type of impact could you see buyer feedback having in the confidence of, for you as a sales leader, and then also how that can trickle down and affect individual sales reps as well?
I think it'll help open up new titles to go after. So, for example, like we usually are talking to designers or researchers or product folks or marketing people, but like we had a great sales cycle where we were talking to a data scientist. And because of having that information, once they signed, it opened up a whole new market for us to go after. So it was something that was like almost like skeptical, and then we did it. And so now it's something that we can kind of rinse, wash, repeat. But having both sets of the equation you have to open up like new markets or even in new geos. I don't know, Michael, do you have anything to add to that one?
I'm gonna steal a quote from good old friend Bailey, and she said, it just reminds me a little bit of like the CRM is not the single source of truth. Your buyer is the single source of truth. And so I think like if we get like in that mindset, it really helps us with these like strategic elements that help us build confidence. And one of the things I've done a lot of like tech tool rollouts, for example, and changes to sales teams and things like that. And one of the things I always try to do is I try to prove it, before I do it. And so like you shouldn't like roll something out and like fingers crossed, like I hope this is going to work. And I honestly see this happen with so many sales decisions. What needs to be happening is you need to prove it to yourself, and then when the rollout is going to be successful. And so I think like this confidence piece is really really essential. The other thought I had was in reference to win-loss analysis. What we're really talking about is being able to see reality clearly. And when you don't have this sort of information, it's essentially leaving things up to chance. And when you leave it up to chance, it favors the status quo, which is usually not our friend. So I think all these like confidence pieces like really tie together. And then when you as the sales leader are feeling more confident, you project that confidence in your sales team. You have these feedback loops from the analysis that enable you to coach them. They trust you, et cetera. And so this is a really important area that I don't think always gets the attention that it needs.
We're medic trained internally, or I've like used BANT in the past, but I really like the gap analysis or white space analysis. So if you're losing a lot to a certain competitor, like how can you find that out earlier in your sales cycles? So by doing those win-loss analysis, you have a clear picture to who on your team is losing deals to get them better at their craft.
I love that.
Exactly. I think I love what you were both saying. And I think a common thread through a lot of this is how can we be very proactive as opposed to reactive in the decisions that we make, right? Whether that's understanding new markets or whether that's understanding, which ICPs or buyer profiles we want to target. How can we have a proactive approach to that? It's interesting. This example is kind of coming to my head. I was working, and this kind of feeds into how this can impact things on the rep level. Michael, you mentioned from a coaching perspective, how can we as leaders help support from a coaching standpoint? I was working one particular deal with somebody on my team, and it was interesting because we run win-loss interviews, but also it's really valuable to run interviews for deals that you win as well. And in this case, we ran through the sales process, and it was an awesome sales process. We had awesome champions. Essentially, if you look at it beat by beat, it was very smooth from beginning to end. And we ended up closing this deal. And then we reach out and we ask them if we can conduct a, closed one interview, right? So when we get that feedback, it's always nice because usually when you're doing a closed lost interview, you're going to maybe see some warts or some things you can improve on, which, is necessary, maybe not the funnest thing. But with the one opportunities, you go in thinking, this was a great process. I'm excited to essentially see all the great things that we did, right? What was interesting was that from our perspective, the sales process seemed relatively flawless. When we got the interview back, what we actually found was that, yes, they were satisfied with the sales process, but there was actually some ambiguity behind the way that we managed the pricing conversation, which completely shocked us. And again, it wasn't detrimental to the point where we lost the deal, thankfully, but it did give us an opportunity to really look at the way that we pitched the pricing and managed the pricing conversation to think, well, it didn't negatively impact this deal, but is it negatively impacting other deals? This
Mhm.
was an insight that was completely lost on us, where we're pitching price every single day. Them being the consumers, and obviously the perspective that matters, having that insight to actually take a second, observe the way that we actually manage the pricing conversation, and being very proactive to making adjustments. That was kind of a real kind of tangible example to me, where we got that feedback from a closed one interview. And Michael, I kind of see you smiling there.
Yeah.
Not sure if you have any similar.
Yeah, no, I just went through something like this as a buyer, so I can speak to that from that angle. I had a sales experience where I had two companies telling me the exact same thing. And so I'm like, I don't know. I'm just going to go off of the sales experience. Honestly, is like what I went with, but I gave them that feedback as a part of my like onboarding customer success call, because it was like really hard as a buyer to like, and I think they think, oh, we won the deal, we must have did like an amazing job. Like I could tell that was sort of the vibe. And I was sort of offering up this information, but if they're running an effective win-loss program, I guarantee you they would be getting this exact same feedback from other buyers, that like you and your competitor are saying the exact same thing. I as a buyer can't tell the difference. That is like essential for you standing out, because it's like, oh, I can just pick whichever one. So that's something I just went through. And then another example for me is I recently like lost a deal, and it was like, oh, like competitor is like what I was told. But then I like back channeled into the company and like found out it was like actually something to do with something completely unrelated to like what they said, but like the buyer was just like nervous to tell me, so I back channeled into it. And again, like you should be orchestrating this type of feedback in a systematic way so that you're getting it consistently for your deals.
I love that. And I love the perspective, Michael, of, from you being on the receiving end of that. So being on, you're evaluating a solution. So it's so interesting when you kind of look through the lens of win-loss analysis that, man, if they were actually conducting this is clearly something that they would uncover, but maybe they're not. They're not selling for differentiation in the way that they should be. Katie, I'm sure you've been on that side of the process, where you've obviously been on the sales side, but then also you've evaluated many solutions. Not sure if you've had any similar insights or something like that in your career.
Yeah, I guess what I'm doing right now is sometimes in our team meetings, we'll hit play on like a chorus or gong call around common questions or objections, and then just open it up to the team members. So to the AEs, solutions consultants, SDRs, BDRs, whatever you guys have in the organization, and talk about how they pitch around that objection, or how would they answer that question? Because then you get different answers, like you get diversity of thought and opinion, and then everyone can mush the best talk track into their own voice. So the next time they hear that, which they will, they have a great answer for it.
I love that. That's great. I love the peer-to-peer like element that you take to that too.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Very nice. We actually do have a question here, and we'd love to encourage everybody that's joined us here. Please go ahead and submit some questions. We would love to hear from our guests. Submit those away, and we can address those. If we don't have any other thoughts on this third pillar here, would love to go ahead and pass it over to questions. Is that all right with you, you two, Michael and Katie?
Sounds great.
Love it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so our first question is from Lois here. So I'll go ahead and read this. So is the bottom line simply confirming the reasons why the client felt your product/offer was valuable enough for them to buy, and then communicating those reasons through the sales team, or is there more to it? So that's the question. Not sure who wants to go ahead and take that one first.
I can start. I definitely think there's a lot more to it, because there's so many nuances to the sales process. So like, what did they like about it? Just because they bought doesn't mean that there weren't things that they might have feedback on. Were there things that were unclear? How was the sales experience? How was the product like positioned before they even came into the sales cycle? So I think there's like a lot of granularity. How long did it take them to buy? What influenced it? How many people were involved on their team? So I think like these like little kind of almost like unspoken details are essential to sales. And so by having like a system in place to capture that information, you're able actually to get like a really complete understanding of why you win. And then, also, the other way too, like why you lose. So I think that's important.
Yeah, those unspoken pieces I always love. So imagine, your usertesting.com. It's like what initially occurred for them to come to the site and fill out a trial. Did they bump into somebody at a park, or is their product on fire and their onboarding flow needs help? Like there's something that happens there that they're filling out your free trial request form or downloading a white paper. And that's the stuff that I kind of want to know more of from our potential buyers or our customers. And that'll help with your top of the funnel.
Yeah, and I would also add to that a little bit as well. I think that, one of the things that we refer to here at Closed is the win-loss maturity curve. And I think that always starts from any company asking the fundamental question of why are we winning and why are we losing deals? And the natural place to go to start is going to be the CRM. And as I think we've made it pretty clearly in this conversation, and I think Michael said it perfectly, I'm going to misquote you there, Michael, but the record of truth. Would you give that to us again, Michael? I'm going to botch it.
Oh yeah, no, it actually isn't my quote. I got it from a good old friend named Bailey, and she said the CRM isn't the single source of truth your buyer is.
There we go. Okay. Yes, that is it. And I think that as we've demonstrated here in the conversation, there's no question that the CRM's data serves a purpose, but you can't make those strategic decisions based solely on that CRM data. So to kind of add to this question here, when we look at that win-loss maturity curve, that could start in the form of, okay, we know that we need to leverage buyer feedback in some form. So how do we start doing that? And that could start in the form of surveys. It could start in the form of us internally reaching out and running like a post-mortem analysis on some deals that are lost, especially if those deals are large or strategic in nature. But I think that what a lot of folks find is that as that maturity curve continues to increase, the most valuable form of feedback is going to come from that independent third party, somebody who doesn't necessarily have that skin in the game, engaging those buyers and conducting, again, in-depth qualitative interviews where you're able to go multiple levels deep to get a true understanding of what those reasons were behind why we won or lost. And then the last thing I'll add there is that we work with a lot of companies where in the curve, they'll get a lot of that win-loss data, but they don't have a way of acting on it. And this is another thing that I'll really focus on here that we see very, very commonly in our customers where you have the information. How do we analyze the data? How do we disseminate it? How do we share it? We want to democratize the data in a form to where it can actually be useful and deployable. So that is actually something that we focus on very heavily, to where we want to be able to filter through the information. We want to look at historical win rates versus current win rates, or we want to look at things per segment or on a per competitor basis. The more creative ways that we can actually look and analyze the information and dig into individual reasons why we lose those deals, that's where those insights get more and more valuable.
Just like a tiny thing to add to that, that like stuck out to me. There's a podcast I was listening to, and the CEO works in our space, and he said they did like analysis of like a bunch of companies, and only 3% of the sales conversations are making it into the CRM. And I was like, that like stopped me in my tracks. But it just goes to show like we're also missing things in there. Not only are we maybe like marking things incorrectly, we're in a rush, it's mandated upon us, we're trying to close the next deal. But then also we're probably missing a lot of things that just aren't there as well. And then if you're trying to make detailed decisions, you want to make them in really like causal ways. Like if you make a change, it causes something else to happen. And so I think it's hard to do that if we aren't even capturing the majority of conversations.
It's usually a cluster in the CRM too, where it's like out of date or somebody got acquired, they rebranded.
Exactly.
And so it'll confuse the team members on what to choose. We do a quarterly close loss meeting, like renewal managers, CS, some higher ups, and we take the analysis and then turn it into enablement for our all sales people. So that flywheel effect. And then again, common objections. So you sales tactics like turn them around or get ahead of it when you see it again. But the win data, I think, is like good Kool-Aid you can use as well in team meetings. So like covering A to Z, the last deal that closed, and what potential hiccups did you have in that sales cycle. And like going in depth with the win data as well as the close loss data, I just think is good Kool-Aid for some people.
I think you make a great point there, Katie, where the win data really helps you. One, it can just be a great source of encouragement and positivity for the team, right? It's a really great morale booster. But then in addition, when you really understand the areas where you win, it allows you to really double down on those areas so that if we know we're particularly strong in this area, let's keep going to it, right? It's been successful for us in the past. Let's keep doing it.
Yeah, so it helps the like you're gonna have different maturity levels or tenures, right, of people selling for you. So when you're presenting on win data, you can one prospect their competition and run the same sales cycle again because you already have the collateral or what they wanted to work on already geared up for you. But also it helps the less tenured AEs just be better, right? Like they're going to pick up on those little things or like spend the time on the right deals because it looks like the makeup of that deal that just closed one.
Yeah.
Love that. That's great. We actually do have another question here that I want to get to from Sarah. So Michael, this is actually directed towards you. Michael mentioned prove it before you do it when rolling out new software to a sales team. She wanted to know if you could provide an example there.
Yeah. So for example, I was rolling out a tech tool right before I left my last company, and I just tried it out with a smaller segment of like a team and really got them driving it forward. And I did that for several reasons. One is because then they become like little advocates for the tool. Once you like fully roll it out to the whole company, they feel kind of honored that they were part of that initial test group, and then they actually are another group of people that can answer questions when you're rolling it out. But you're also like testing, is this going to like work? Is this a good fit for us? And so that's with like rolling out software, but I apply that to like everything. So and it works. Like we've even done it with like pricing. We've done it with demand gen. We've done it with blog posts. I've done it with LinkedIn posts. Like I just really like to like make sure that it's like accurate. And so taking that same like rolling out technology approach has really helped me as someone who's served in like an enablement type role to roll out tools effectively to sales teams, and again take the guesswork out of it. So like I know by the time it's rolled out that it's going to be successful. Like there's no guesswork behind it.
Yeah, Katie, similar thoughts on your end, or not sure if you have any experience there as well?
I just think by not doing something like this, you're missing out on the diversity of pipeline. So I used to work with a guy that always talked about it as like an empty pool. Like, so if you picture this empty pool, you want as many hoses turned on to feed your pipeline. So whether it be partnerships or technical integrations, like turn those hoses on, or inbound or outbound or referrals. So what Michael alluded to, you can actually use that cohort to then be referrals to help either save a customer or win a new one over.
I love that. Just the multiple channels there. I think that makes a ton of sense. We have another question I'd love to get to. This is a really great question from Alexandra. What questions, let me see here. Let's see. What questions have you found what channels have you found to be the best way to collect the loss data, i.e. surveys, interviews with the buyer? Who handles that in your organization assuring it gets done? That's a really good question. Curious if either of you want to take that. I know that I can definitely comment on it as well, but would love to hear from either of you first.
Our revenue operations team handles it internally right now.
We have had, I've been in organizations that did product marketing and also rev ops, but like with kind of oversight of sales because they really care about it. But yeah, I've seen it both product marketing and revenue operations. I think there was another component about like surveys. I generally prefer like conversations, but maybe for like more transactional deals, I've seen actually in post sales as well, like maybe surveys, like if there's a huge quantity or something like that. But my preference leads towards conversations.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And what I would probably add to this is that So in reference to the first question of who would own a program like this, we see a lot of different things here at Close. The bottom line, though, is that these initiatives are always most effective when there's cross-departmental buy-in, right? Because the reality is that win-loss data impacts every single org. So whether it's on the sales side, the marketing side, the product side, it doesn't really matter where, as long as each department acknowledges that this information is extremely valuable and that it's going to impact the way that it's going to impact product roadmap. It's going to impact the way that we market and who we're marketing to. It's going to impact the way that we empower sales reps and sales leaders. So I've seen it live with product marketing. I've seen it live with sales. Product marketing is interesting because it kind of sits in this, on the Venn diagram of all these, different departments in the middle between, enablement and sales and marketing and product. So that tends to be a very common sweet spot that we see. But really, it ultimately depends on the win-loss goals of that particular customer, right? What are the vulnerabilities that they have seen, or what are some of the hypotheses they have as to why they're winning and losing deals? And oftentimes that can determine who's going to oversee the program. But again, as long as there's that cross-departmental buy-in, that always bodes very well. And then in reference to the question about, what type of feedback channels, whether that be interview, whether it be survey, what we typically find is that a lot of that is going to depend on pipeline composition. For example, if we're working with a client that has very, very high value deals, but the volume of those deals is very low, that type of pipeline composition might lend itself more of a qualitative interview, feedback setting. Because, if it's a very high value deal, oftentimes that means there are multiple decision makers, multiple economic buyers. It interacted with a lot of different people throughout the sales process. An opportunity like that, again, might lend itself to even multiple interviews within that org alone, right? Whereas if you're an organization where, as Michael pointed out, very high volume, maybe, even somewhat transactional, a lot of opportunities going through the pipeline. Well, sure, you're going to want to leverage qualitative interviews regardless, but that does kind of open the door where maybe we want to leverage more surveys as well, where the ideal scenario is that we could engage every single closed lost opportunity across the pipeline and engage with them and understand why they did or did not go with us in the end. That's obviously not going to be feasible logistically. So if we're working with a very high volume, one of the things that we can do is to subsidize that volume. We might entertain the idea of leveraging surveys in addition to some qualitative interviews. But Michael, as you've run some win-loss programs, it sounds like that's something that you've seen as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That I think that thinking mirrors exactly how I've seen it done in the past, and it really is driving behavior across the whole organization. And typically, like, lots of eyes are on it. So yeah, that's definitely consistent with what I've seen.
I guess one thing to add is the trend analysis. So whether it be a seasonal business or quarter over quarter, things are changing, like we've all seen recently. What you can do is take the best person at selling against, pricing or competition, and then have them present to the cohort of AEs that are losing to that reason. Mm-hmm. And so you enable the training internally to get them better.
I love that. Yeah, the enablement application of this information is absolutely paramount, right? The way that, and again, as you're saying, Katie, we can get the information quickly and effectively and then deploy that information to really empower our sellers to improve. That's something that it's surprising how few sales teams are actually doing that. And it's, in a lot of ways, it's low-hanging fruit, right? It's information that's right there. Again, kind of going back to this concept of let's be very proactive in the way that we address some of these things as opposed to reactive. And in turn, helping us win more deals. So let's see. It looks like those are the questions that we have detailed here. I don't have any other additional questions coming in. We'll open it up. If anybody else has a question they want to submit, go ahead and submit it. Would love to hear that. If not, what we'll do here is, any final words from Katie and Michael, words of wisdom from them would be great as we part ways here. One thing that I would love to just kind of plug here at the end is, again, one of the things that we really leverage is that free interview, which I'll touch on in just a moment. But Katie, Michael, any final thoughts for us before we part ways?
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. I just think that it's so important to to do win-loss analysis and also take the feedback from them and let it permeate throughout the organization into your coaching and the sales process, and also maybe even your product and other areas as well. So I think the companies, like, one thing that stood out to me when Katie was talking is that the companies that are treating this as like granular, or even doing some of the things she just said about coaching and training and how you deploy it. These like little granular pieces of action that you take in your organization are part of the narrative of why you grow or why you stagnate. And so it's really important to, I think, do these things. But yeah, also thanks for having us. It's been a really fun session, and this is a topic near and dear to my heart.
Yes, thank you both so much for your insights, for your guidance. I'm sure that the audience learned a lot from each of you. So thank you so much. I know you're both very busy. Thank you for taking the time. Really, really appreciate it. Again, one more thing here. If you are interested in close running a WinLoss interview for you, or a WinLoss interview for you, please go ahead and do so. If there's that one opportunity, you're really trying to understand why you lost, want to understand why you won, please let's put our customer feedback to the test. We'd love to go ahead and run a free interview for you. Really give you a proof of concept of the value that true customer insights via win-loss analysis, how much value that can bring. So again, thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thank you to our guests. We appreciate your time.
Awesome. Really awesome session. Be sure to grab that interview. We'll include a link to that in the post event email as well. Thanks to all the attendees for being here and being engaged and asking your questions. Always means a lot to me, I know. Thanks to Close just for sponsoring, and thanks to Rhett, Katie, and Michael for being available and being present with us live. I know it means a lot to the community. So I really appreciate each and every one of you, and I look forward to next week's events. Thank you, everybody.